everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Cillizza, political commentator and senior advisor of DGA Group. Chris, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thank you for having me.
We have a lot of news to discuss today. The DNC officially wrapped. Vice President Kamala Harris officially accepted the nomination last night in a speech where she was really able to reintroduce herself to the country. How do you think she did?
Yeah, and I would say, honestly, probably introduce herself to a lot of the country. I always say the vice president is usually the most unknown, known person in America. In that, of course, I think most people, if you walked up to them on the street and said, who's the vice president, they would probably know. But then if you said, name me one other fact about Kamala Harris, they might not be able to do it. So I think that's why the convention was particularly important here, right? Remember, we're dealing with a really truncated timeline. A month ago, she was not the nominee. Joe Biden had just dropped out. Well, she's the nominee now, so you got to introduce her to people. She's got to step out in her own right. I think she did a good job. I don't think the speech was overwhelmingly good, but I think it went through the beats you need, which is here's her personal story. Here's where she and Trump differ. Here's her broad vision for the country. So in that regard, I would say a success.
And she did differentiate herself from Donald Trump. Her campaign for the past few weeks has been, I'm the prosecutor, he's the felon. But how do you think she differentiated herself from Joe Biden? Because voters were not enthusiastic about Joe Biden running for a second term. He was not floundering in the polls a bit when he dropped out. So do you think she was able to, carve out her own path?
So what's interesting is I think she tried to carve her own path by not talking all that much about Joe Biden. In the very beginning of the speech, she said, Joe and I did great things. It was always going to be sort of a hard convention in that regard because they pushed Joe Biden out, but they also kind of wanted to honor him because he was the sitting president of the United States and he's in their party. So it's always a little bit tough. So I think what she effectively did is get the Joe Biden stuff out of the way early. Monday night, they did the Biden night. He spoke and then he left. So there wasn't all that much to talk about other than maybe have a line about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did great things. But you're exactly right. The truth of the matter is Joe Biden is an unpopular president on the overall, on the economy, on his handling of immigration, on whether or not the country's on the right track or going in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris doesn't really want to be linked to all of those things. And Donald Trump is going to try his hardest to do exactly that between now and the election.
The DNC was really trying, the Democrats were trying rather, to make themselves appear to be that big tent party. Hey, we're here for you no matter what race, religion, age, political leaning. And Bret Baier from Fox said this, that he thought parts of Kamala Harris's speech, quote, were specifically aimed at the Nikki Haley Republicans around the country. Do you agree there?
Yes, totally. I thought one of the biggest differences and really striking between the Republican convention and the Democratic convention, they were separated by about a month because of the Olympics, but I covered both. In the Democratic convention, all of the big name speakers, that's obviously Kamala Harris, vice presidential nominee Tim Walz, both of the Obamas, Barack and Michelle, Oprah Winfrey, all of them made an explicit argument to folks not in the room, but watching at home. Look, you may not agree with us on everything. But we are a home for you. We can share your values. There are things we have in common. And that is a real contrast to the Republican National Convention where there wasn't a lot of that. It felt to me like it was aimed a lot more at the people in the room, the Republican base, the Trump base. And to me, you're much smarter to use a convention not to unite your base, but really because they should already be united, but to reach out or begin the outreach to some of those people who we know don't follow politics all that closely and haven't made their mind up.
And to your point, your base is probably going to come out and vote for you. It's those independents and undecideds that you really need. And Oprah did a good job of that. She said, hey, all you independents, I'm an independent too. Yep. Listen to me now. Come out, vote your values, vote Kamala Harris. But the DNC and RNC came at really interesting times for each party. They came at the highs of each party. As we know, the RNC a month ago, Trump was dominating in the polls. He had just survived an assassination attempt. The party had never looked more unified. There was almost an air that they had this in the bag. Now, a month later at the DNC, Democrats feel that type of high too. So who do you think did their convention more successfully, the RNC or DNC?
It's so hard to compare because at the RNC, I mean, it feels like 2 years ago, but at the RNC, Joe Biden was still the Democratic presidential nominee, right? So they spent time on him and his policies. I think they had a sense of where it was headed, but obviously Republicans weren't able to focus on Kamala Harris. Fast forward a month, now obviously all the focus is on Donald Trump from the Kamala Harris end. So I think it's a little hard to compare. I always think you'd rather go second in a convention rather than first, to be honest, because news happens, as we saw over the last 2.5 months. I mean, I think it's like a baseball game. You'd rather have the last at bat rather than lead off the game so that you know what you need to do. And I think so in that regard, I think Democrats just benefit from the timing.
And they benefited, I think, from watching the RNC's roll call and really making it their own. I mean, Lil Jon came out. It was an electric moment to watch.
Totally.
But I want to talk about the weaknesses of each candidate. Now we see the conventions. What are the weaknesses of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and what do you think they should be doing between now and that debate on September 10th?
Sure. I mean, I think that the weaknesses are pretty obvious. So for Donald Trump, his greatest strength is that he's Donald Trump. His greatest weakness is that he's Donald Trump, right? I mean, like, he struggles to stay on message. If he could just talk about the economy and immigration and the situation at the border, I think he'd probably win. But if he could just talk about those two things, he wouldn't be Donald Trump, right? I mean, that's the essence of it. He gets very distracted. He talks about whether Kamala Harris is black or not. He attacks Brian Kemp, the popular Republican governor of Georgia. He fixates on whether Tim Walz was the assistant coach of the Mankato West football team or the head coach. These things do not matter to voters. So I think his weakness is just his inability to be disciplined, his inability to be on message. It always has been. It always will be. For Harris, look, I think she is pretty much an empty vessel to most of the people in the country. She really hasn't outlined policies that she believes in. She's talked a little bit about housing. She's talked a little bit about raising the corporate tax rate, but she's not talked in depth about policy in any way. And yes, I am a journalist. I do think that she needs to talk to reporters. She has not given a sit-down interview or a press conference in the 35 days since it's been clear she's the nominee. That's too long. I think she has to start doing that. She became the Democratic nominee effectively by acclamation. No one voted for her and no one ran against her. She is now in a position of being one of two people in this country who can be the most powerful person in the world in 3 months. I think you have to talk about what you think, why you think it, and where you're headed in a format that is not inherently friendly like your party's convention.
That's been a popular sentiment over my conversations of the past week, that Democrats seem to be high on vibes and a little light on policy here. So when the conversation switches from momentum, from energy, from this excitement of Vice President Kamala Harris now at the top of the ticket, I mean, what happens during this race when it's policy?
Well, I honestly, I think Kamala Harris and her team would hope that it doesn't switch, right? I mean, it's not like we've got a year to go until the election. There's 74 days until the election. I mean, that's one of the things that she benefits from in this very abbreviated nomination schedule that wound up happening. I think they would love for the election to be about sort of personality, joy versus kind of the deep pessimism that Donald Trump represents. Vigor and youth versus a 78-year-old guy. I mean, the age thing has sort of been flipped on its head now. Donald Trump is the old guy in the race. I'm not sure that vibes alone get you the next 74 days. I do think there will be some policy conversation. I do think there will be some investigation into why she was much more liberal when she ran for president in 2020 in terms of the position she takes versus what she is now and what changed, and how she navigates that will matter. The debate will matter. My guess is if we have a debate on September 10th, which I think we will, we'll have one more at either the end of September or early October. Those will matter because people will be getting, if not one of their first looks at Kamala Harris in an adverse setting. And how she handles it matters hugely because, again, most people still, even after the convention, most people still have a very loose sense of who she is and what she wants to do outside of the Democratic base. And I think that's the work of the next 2 months, is defining her either positively or negatively.
Another wrench that was thrown into this election as I was walking in the door to talk to you is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. apparently dropped out and he did endorse Donald Trump. Earlier this week, his running mate said that she thinks if they dropped out, they would help Donald Trump. Do you think that's true? Do you think this is going to impact the race, and by how much?
So a couple things with Kennedy. Number one, his worst day as a candidate was July 21st, the day Joe Biden dropped out of the race, because he had a credible argument to double-digit support when it was two candidates no one wanted, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Well, when one of those candidates disappeared, Kennedy's appeal disappeared. So he went from 10 or 12 in national polls to 4 or 5 or even lower. So when we talk about his support, I think we have to remember his support has been declining for the last 6 weeks. I also think his support is not monolithic, right? I mean, there are anti-vaxxers, there are conspiracy theorists, there are environmentalists, there are hippies. There are people who are distrustful of sort of what they would define as the elite, whether it's the corporate elite or the media elite. I don't know that a candidate saying, okay, a candidate like that saying, okay, I'm with Donald Trump means that all of his voters just sort of march over into the Trump camp. I think some will. And I think what's important to remember here is we're probably not talking about big margins in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, right? These elections in 2020, Arizona was just decided by 11,000 votes. Given narrow margins like that, I don't want to dismiss Kennedy's support, because if 7,500 people who are going to vote for RFK wind up voting for Trump in Arizona, that could be the difference. I don't think it's a massive game changer, but remember, we're dealing with small margins in these swing states.
If we remember a year ago, or not a year ago, it feels like a year ago, but a month ago rather, that was unintentional, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
The RNC ended on a Thursday night. Donald Trump spoke. These vibes that we keep talking about in this election were at an all-time high for the GOP. Sunday, President Joe Biden dropped out of the race. The wind was really taken out of the sails of the Republicans. Now the DNC ends on a Thursday night. RFK Jr. drops out, endorses Trump. Does that have the same punch at all?
No. The incumbent president of the United States stepping away from the race is a gigantic deal. RFK Jr., a third-party candidate polling at around 5% nationally, is not nothing. I mean, I don't want to dismiss it. It's not nothing. Trump would much rather have RFK Jr. support than not. But it's not even close to the same level, sort of a titanic shock and change in the race as Biden.
Well, what are you looking out for next between now and September 10th, that debate that everyone, because we know June 27th changed the course of this election forever. That was the date of the Biden-Trump debate. What are you looking out for between now and the Trump-Harris debate?
What does Kamala Harris do to beef up what she has said from a policy perspective? Who does she choose to sit down with? Remember, she said she would do at least one interview before August 31st. Well, she's got about a week left to make that. I think she should do more, but she needs to do at least one, in my opinion. Who does she sit down with? How does it go? Because if you remember back, her interview with Lester Holt on The Border and NBC wasn't great for her, and she stopped kind of doing them. So has she gotten better in that regard? For Trump, he has been scrambling and rambling for about a month. I think the question is, can he find the message against Harris? He's tried a lot of things. I don't think anything's really stuck yet. Can he find something to hit her with while being disciplined on economy and the border? And that's it doesn't seem like a gigantic challenge, but for someone like Donald Trump who lacks that sort of discipline, it really is.
Chris Cillizza, I appreciate your insight today, your expertise. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you can come back soon.
I will be here.